For 20 years, my parents called me the slow one, while my sister Miranda collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked my dyslexia at dinner tables, excluded me from family decisions, and paid me a fraction of what they paid her. A stranger handed me an envelope that would expose every lie my parents ever told about me. What they didn't know, Grandma had been watching. She saw everything. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire. My grandmother, Eleanor. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed. At 7, the letters on pages would swim and rearrange themselves, turning simple sentences into puzzles that took me 3 times longer to solve than other kids. My parents' response wasn't support, it was shame. When I was 12, they hired tutors for Miranda violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion classes, SAT prep with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. Dulcie, we've already spent so much on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children just aren't academic. I was 12. I believed her, so I learned to adapt on my own. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I developed a system of visual notes, diagrams, and flowcharts that helped me process information in ways traditional reading couldn't. I'd take the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side, where she'd sit with me for hours explaining concepts through stories instead of textbooks. Dooley, she told me once, her weathered, "You read slower than most, that you see things others miss. That's not a disability, sweetheart. That's a different kind of vision." I didn't fully understand what she meant. Then I would eventually, but first, I had to survive another 19 years of being the Whitford family's embarrassing secret. Christmas 2018, 20 relatives gathered around the mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. My father stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he wore. Like a second skin. "Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School full scholarship." Applause. Cheers. Miranda blushed with practiced modesty. My eldest daughter, Gerald, continued, beaming, "will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She's going to take this family and this company to extraordinary heights." More applause. Then my father's gaze drifted down the table. To me, and Dooley, he paused. Soft, uncomfortable laughs. The kind people make when they don't know what else to do. Miranda didn't defend me. She laughed. Along with them, I stared at my plate. The roasted lamb blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. Grandma Eleanor, seated across from me, squeezed gently. She didn't say anything. Not then. I didn't know it at the time, but that Christmas dinner, that moment of casual cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had set. Something in motion, something that would take 5 years to detonate. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not an Ivy, never an Ivy, I applied for a position at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could contribute, that the family business could be my path too. Administrative assistant, salary $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined as chief legal counsel. Her salary $280,000 plus bonuses. My job consisted of photocopying documents, booking conference rooms, and fetching coffee for executives who never learned my name. I discovered something about myself during those long hours in the copy room. I could spot patterns others missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I'd sketch diagrams of the relationships between parties, the flow of money, the potential conflicts. A skill I developed to compensate for my reading difficulties had become something else entirely. Grandma Eleanor had taught me this. During those Sunday afternoons at her apartment, not word by word, but as systems, as structures. He looks for what he can exploit. You read them like an architect. You see how all the pieces connect. That same day, she'd handed me a small wooden box, mahogany with brass hinges. "Keep this safe," she'd said. I'd taken the box home, tucked it in my closet, and tried to forget the strange. Grandma, she was 82 then. Her once vigorous frame grown thin, her silver hair wispy against the pillow of her armchair. Sit down, Dooley. I sat across from her in the living room where I'd spent so many Sunday afternoons. The walls were covered with photographs. Ella Lehner breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Ella Lehner shaking hands with Mayor K.O. Ella Lehner accepting a Women in Business Award in 1987. Not a single photo of my father at the helm. I built Whitford Properties from nothing, she said, her voice carrying decades of steel. One office, one secretary, 60 years of work. Your father. She paused and something bitter flickered across her face. Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something. Grandma, he judges people by their credentials, their degrees, their ability to perform in boardrooms. She leaned forward. I judge people by how they treat those who can't fight back. And you, Dulcie, you're the only one in this family who knows how to be kind. She pressed the wooden box into my hands. There's something inside that might help you someday, but not yet. What to do? I wanted to ask what she meant, what was inside, why she'd chosen me, but she changed the subject, started talking about the weather. I held her, hand in the hospice, the only family member at her bedside. The box remained unopened in my closet. April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line position, restructuring confidential. Dear Ms. Whitford, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated. HR will contact you regarding severance options. I read it 3 times. The letters swam, rearranged, settled back into the same devastating message. That evening, I stayed late organizing files no one would ever look at. Through the thin wall separating my cubicle from my father's corner office, I heard voices. Gerald and Priscilla. Can't have her here when Miranda takes over. My father was saying it looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary? People will ask questions. What kind of questions? Why she's not in leadership? Why we haven't promoted her? A pause. Why she's the way she is? My mother's response came soft, almost gentle. We've done everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children just don't have what it takes. Exactly. So she needs to go. We'll give her a generous severance. $42,000 a year. My studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. No savings, no safety net. But the money wasn't what made my chest tight. It was the realization settling into. My bones like frost. If I let them do this, if I accepted their version of who I was, I would spend the rest of my life as the family failure. May 15th, 2024, the Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom. 350. Guests filled the gilded room. Business partners, investors, lawyers from white shoe firms, extended family members I barely recognized. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin in the corner. This was Gerald Whitford's kingdom, his stage, the place where he performed his role as patriarch, as mogul, as the man who had everything. I stood in the entrance, tugging at the hem of my dress, black, simple, $79 from Zara, the most I could afford on my salary. Everyone else glittered in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. My mother intercepted me before I could find a seat. Dulcie. Priscilla's gaze traveled from my drugstore makeup to my scuffed heels, her lips pressed into a thin line. You couldn't find anything nicer. This is what I have. Well, she adjusted her. Cartier bracelet. You'll be at table 27 near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself. Of course, and Dulcie. She leaned closer, her Chanel No. 5 overwhelming. Tonight is Miranda's night. Whatever you're feeling, whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a pillar. My table mates were distant cousins I'd met maybe twice. From my seat, I could see the main stage. The massive portrait of Miranda and her Harvard regalia, the banner reading, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024." And near the entrance, standing alone by the door, a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't eating, just watching. His eyes found mine across the crowded room. Something cold prickled down my spine. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage where my father stood, champagne flute raised. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman. The applause began before he finished the sentence. Miranda graduated top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She completed a clerkship with Justice Reynolds. And last month, she made partner track at Sullivan and Cromwell in record time. Gerald's voice swelled with pride. But tonight, I'm not just celebrating her achievements. I'm announcing her future. Miranda joined him on stage, radiant in emerald Valentino. Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence at 7 and 40 Park Avenue, currently valued at $13 million. A Tesla Model S Plaid. The room erupted. Standing ovation, camera flashes. Miranda dabbed at her eyes with performative grace. 350 people celebrating. And not one of them glanced at table 27, the cousin beside me. A woman I met at a funeral 8 years ago leaned over. Julie, right? So, what does that mean for you? I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I say? That I'd just been formally erased from my own family? That the termination letter in my inbox was only the beginning? That every fear I'd ever had about being worthless had just been confirmed in front of everyone who mattered? The applause died down. Cameras clicked, and through the crowd, the silver-haired man at the door began walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment, the man stopped at my table. With deep-set eyes and the careful posture of someone who's spent his life in courtrooms. Miss Whitford, that's me. He pulled a business card from his breast pocket. Cream-colored embossed Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I was your grandmother's lawyer. My grandmother? The words hit like a punch. Eleanor passed away 3 years ago. I'm aware. He didn't sit, didn't soften. She left something for you with very specific instructions about when to deliver it. From inside his jacket, he produced a cream envelope, heavy stock, sealed with red wax bearing a notary stamp. What is this? Her will. The real one. His voice dropped. The one your father doesn't know exists. I stared at the envelope. The notary seal read Morrison and Blake, September 12th, 2019. 5 months after that, your grandmother gave me explicit instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you. Alice glanced toward the stage where Gerald and Miranda were still basking in applause. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Mr. Ellis, what's in here? For the first time, something almost like warmth flickered in his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor told me to tell you. Give this to Dulcie on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'd be ready. He straightened his tie. I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom. I pushed through the service. Entrance found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The sounds of celebration muffled to a distant hum. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. A date, September 12th, 2019. I read slowly, carefully. The letters swam, but I forced them into focus. I, Ella Laner Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. My eyes caught on a paragraph near the middle. To my granddaughter Dulcie, LLC currently valued at approximately $47 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I read it again and again. 51% controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulcie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned. She'd seen everything, condition, To activate this bequest, Dooley must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void, and all assets shall transfer per my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The document clutched to my chest. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now I had to decide if I was brave enough to use it. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the coat check when I emerged. You read it. The 72-hour clause. My voice cracked. Why would she put that in? Your grandmother knew you, Miss Whitford. He handed me a second card. This one with a personal cell number handwritten on the back. She knew that if she gave you unlimited, the deadline isn't a punishment, it's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to change their minds about you, to take what's rightfully yours. He checked his watch. Is 8:30 p.m. May 18th. 3 days. If you want to proceed, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you draft it. Through the ballroom doors, I could see my father still on stage posing for photographs with Miranda. My mother circulated among guests, accepting congratulations as if she'd earned them herself. If I did this, if I invoked the will, I would destroy every relationship I had left. My parents would never forgive me. Miranda would see it as betrayal. But if I stayed silent, I would accept their verdict. I would become exactly what they'd always said I was. The failure, the slow one, the daughter who didn't matter. Miss Whitford. Ellis's voice cut through my spiral. Your grandmother believed in you. I looked at the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who'd held my hand under Christmas tables and taught me to read contracts like architecture. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. We're requesting that board meeting. Ellis allowed. Himself a small smile. She said, you would. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, if you know what it feels like to be dismissed, I want you to comment the word enough below. Let me know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to see what, that night, back in my cramped Queens apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. My roommates were asleep. The only light came from the street lamp outside my window, casting orange stripes across my bed where I sat cross-legged, the mahogany box in my lap. The brass hinges creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside a handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, a faded document with a 1965 date stamp and a USB drive, sleek and modern, clearly added much later. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Dulcie, if you're reading this, then Jonathan has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1965 when I founded Whitford Properties with two colleagues who have long since passed. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting, rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without board approval. The USB contains something else, something your father hoped I'd forgotten. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. His stated reason, I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason, he wanted control, and I was in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for the way he treated you to justify it. As though diminishing you somehow proved I was unfit. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The file was labeled Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018, PDF, my father's. Documented timestamped evidence. May 16th, 91 a.m. Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Dooley Whitford. Her voice carried the rasp of someone who'd smoked for decades and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. I gripped my phone tighter. There is a difference. Margaret's tone shifted. Sharper now, sharper now. You want to request an emergency board meeting? That requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I'm one. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. Members have expressed concerns privately. They just need someone to go first. Hope sparked in my chest. Who? Richard Holloway? Susan Park. She corrected herself. Susan Parker. They've both been on the receiving end of Gerald's temper in closed sessions. I'll make some calls. Another pause. Dooley, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They'll say terrible things. They've been saying terrible things my whole life. At least now I get to respond. Margaret laughed. Ella Lehner always said you would steal under all that quiet. I'm starting to see what she meant. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition ready by tonight. Board meeting. Request May 18th, 10 a.m. Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting in that boardroom. I was sitting in my cubicle at Whitford Properties, pretending to organize. Files. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Requested by Margaret Coleman and 2 other directors. A pause. Sharp as broken glass. Margaret Coleman hasn't requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Dooley. Miranda's composure cracked. If you're trying to embarrass us, trying to make some kind. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Gerald stormed past my cubicle on his way to his office. Hard enough to rattle the windows through the wall. No, I'm not worried. Dooley, my God, Miranda, she can barely write a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night in my apartment, I printed 3 copies of the will, downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as backup, wrote a brief statement, not an accusation, just a presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed he'd attend as the authenticating attorney. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept. For once, it was an anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m. Mitford Tower. The elevator opened. Onto the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble. The kind of corporate opulence designed to intimidate. I stepped out in a borrowed gray blazer. My roommate's 2 sizes too big, carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought at Goodwill for $12. The security guard at the boardroom door held up his hand. Name? Dooley Whitford. He checked his tablet, frowned. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Whitford Properties employee and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I can't let you. Is there a problem? Miranda's voice behind me. I turned. She looked immaculate. Navy power suit, Hermes scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Dooley? Her smile didn't reach. Her eyes. What are you doing here? A sharp performative sound. About what? You work in the copy room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment. It's not that complicated. Before she could respond, our father appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by 2 senior executives. What's going on here? Dulcie wants to attend the board meeting. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside. The boardroom. It does. 72 years old, silver-haired. Margaret smiled. Let her in. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might physically block the door. But Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years. Her authority in that room exceeded his. Fine. My father's voice was ice. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. 12 leather chairs. Including I noticed my grandmother Eleanor, her painted eyes seeming to watch from above the fireplace. 12 board members took their seats. Gerald at the head, Miranda to his right, not officially a board member yet, but positioned as the apparent. I was directed to a chair at the far end, the children's table of corporate governance. In the corner, Jonathan Ellis sat with his briefcase. He caught my eye and nodded once. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who'd known my grandmother for decades, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret rose. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light, a document that affects the ownership structure of this company. I yield my time to Miss Dooley Whitford. All eyes turned to me. Miranda smirked. Gerald leaned back, in his chair with theatrical boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I expected. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. I opened my portfolio. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise to some of you. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Before I could continue, my father raised his hand. Gerald stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. I need to provide some context. Gerald, Margaret started. Dulcie's my daughter. And I love her, but she's not qualified to address this board on any business matter. She works in an administrative role. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience. She struggles with reading. We've tried to support her, but she shrugged elegantly. Some limitations can't be overcome with effort alone. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. What we're seeing here, Gerald continued, is a troubled young woman acting out, perhaps due to the announcement at Miranda's graduation party. Sibling jealousy is Mr. Whitford. Robert Hartley's voice cut through like a gavel. You'll have an opportunity to respond, but Miss Whitford requested this time, and she's entitled to use it. Gerald sat down. His expression promised consequences. Not anger, something colder, clearer. They weren't trying to protect me. They weren't even trying to protect the company. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I pulled the document from my portfolio. I won't be discussing my reading ability today. I'll be discussing this. I held up the will. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, founder of this company. Notarized September 12th, 2019. Gerald's face drained of color. That's impossible. Gerald's voice came out strangled. My mother's will was executed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her previous will. A subsequent valid. Will automatically revokes all prior testament documents. This will, I placed it on the table, was executed 4 years after the one you possess. Corner seat. Would you please confirm the authenticity of this document? Jonathan approached the table. I'm Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Eleanor Whitford's personal attorney. From 2008 until her death in 2021, I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12th, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original is held in escrow at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley studied the document. His eyebrows rose. This will be Queequeg's 51% of Whitford Properties shares, too. He looked up at me. To you, Miss Whitford. Murmurs rippled around the table. It's not. Jonathan's response was immediate, and I'd advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Miss Whitford. Morrison & Blake's reputation speaks for itself. Gerald slammed his palm on the table. This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated? I pulled out my phone. I pressed play on the 2018 board meeting audio. My father's voice filled the room. Eleanor is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording, that was a private board discussion which Eleanor attended. I kept my voice steady. She recorded it as was her right as a shareholder. Miss Whitford, would you read the relevant passage aloud? For the record, I nodded, took a breath. To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties, LLC, along with all voting rights associated therewith. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dooley. She has been excluded, diminished. and denied opportunity not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Miranda made a choking sound. Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I looked directly at my father. Gerald has confused credentials with character, degrees with worth. He tried to strip me of my voting rights because I saw through him. He marginalized Dulcie because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Gerald said nothing. His hands, I noticed, were trembling. The will concludes, I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. One choose. Duly, Robert Hartley removed his reading glasses. Jonathan, you can confirm this document is legally binding. I can. The 2015 will is superseded. As of this moment, Dulcie Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled quietly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged glances. And for the first time in my life, I watched my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This doesn't prove anything, Miranda said. Even if the will is valid, which we'll contest, Dooley has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company. I address the full board now. I'm asking you to examine the facts. March 14th, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018-07 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated rationale found the passage. The founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. That was taken out of context. Gerald said the resolution failed by 2 votes. Eleanor's vote and Margaret Coleman's. I looked at Margaret. Is that accurate? Margaret nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor called me that night. She was devastated. Not because of the resolution, she knew it would fail, but because her own son had tried to take everything she'd built. This is ancient history, Gerald started. It's evidence. I cut him off. Evidence that my grandmother wasn't suffering from diminished capacity when she wrote that 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son, and she was protecting me. Does anyone else have documentation contradicting what's been presented? Silence. Gerald, my father's jaw worked. No words came. Miranda. My sister stared at the table. Her perfect composure had cracked entirely. Richard Holloway spoke for the first time. Robert, I think we need to recess and have legal counsel review these documents. Agreed. Hartley checked his watch. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Jonathan. Please remain available. The board members rose. Conversations broke out in hushed tones. Gerald didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. I wondered if he could feel her watching. 15 minutes stretched into 45. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson, whom I'd never met, spent the entire time on his phone with Morrison and Blake. At the end of the table, Jonathan Ellis brought me a glass of water. Margaret Coleman patted my shoulder as she passed. Finally, Patterson returned to the table and whispered in Robert Hartley's ear. Hartley's expression flickered. Surprise, then resignation. Please take your seats. The board members filed back to their chairs. The tension in the room had crystallized into something brittle. Our legal counsel has confirmed the following. Hartley read from his notes. The will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law. Effective immediately, Julian Whitford holds 51% of Whitford property shares. Someone inhaled. Sharply. Additionally, Hartley continued, as majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the right to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership. He looked at me. Miss Whitford, do you have any motions you wish to? My heart was pounding, but my voice held steady. I have one motion. Gerald rose from his seat. Robert, this is sit down, Gerald. Hartley's voice carried unexpected steel. I looked around the table at 12 people who, until an hour ago, had never considered me capable of anything. Now they waited for my decision. The power to destroy my father's career was in my hands. I thought about what my grandmother would want, and I made my choice. I'm not proposing to remove Gerald Whitford as CEO. The tension in the room shifted. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked surprised. What I am proposing, I continued, is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Gerald Whitford retains their confidence as CEO of Whitford Properties. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. This is absurd, Miranda stood. You're turning this into a spectacle, a revenge fantasy. No, I met her eyes. This is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every well-run company. The same process Grandma Eleanor established in our bylaws 40 years ago. Robert Hartley studied me for a long moment. Something like respect flickered in his expression. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded. Margaret Coleman didn't hesitate. Then we'll vote. All those expressing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands. 4 hands went up. Gerald's allies. People who owed their board seats to his recommendations, all those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Robert Hartley counted twice. Then he set down his pen. The motion carries 7-4 with 1 abstention. He turned to Gerald. Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. Per section 14.3 of our bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Gerald said nothing. He stood, looked at me, really looked at me. For what might have been the first time in my life, I expected rage, hatred, threats. What I saw was worse, recognition. The understanding that he'd underestimated me so completely that he'd lost everything. He walked out without a word. I know what some of you are thinking right now. Why didn't she just fire him? Why give him the chance to keep his job? Because revenge isn't justice. Because destroying someone doesn't undo what they did to you. And because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel, she raised me to be fair. If that resonates with you, hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications because the story isn't over, not even close. Now, back to what happened after that boardroom cleared. Gerald caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. Priscilla was with him. Someone must have called her during the recess. You ungrateful, scheming Gerald. Priscilla put a hand on his arm. Not here, not here. She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people. I stood my ground. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth. The truth? Gerald laughed bitterly. Your grandmother was manipulated. My voice didn't waver. You didn't lose because I betrayed you. Priscilla stepped forward. Dulcie, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You erased me. 28 years of silence crystallized into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation where you talked about Miranda's achievements and pretended I didn't exist, that wasn't protection. That was abandonment. That's not fair. You're right. It wasn't fair. I met my mother's eyes. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving. The documents speak for themselves. Gerald grabbed my arm. This isn't over. Because Grandma Eleanor planned for every contingency, including this one. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Dulcie, wait. I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the brush. Steel wall, finally allowing myself to breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 hours began to ebb, leaving something unexpected in its wake. Not triumph, not satisfaction, grief. Enough, quite enough, good enough, my parents would eventually see me, love me the way they loved Miranda. That hope was dead now. I'd killed it myself. The elevator descended 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I'd wiped my eyes and straightened my borrowed blazer. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the security desk. That was he searched for. The word remarkable. It was necessary. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had. In the company I don't want to be CEO, I never did. We stopped at the revolving doors. The board will want to meet with you, discuss transition plans, your role going forward, I know, but not today. Today, I just need to be Dewey Whitford, not a shareholder, not a victim, not a symbol. And tomorrow I look back at Whitford Tower, 42 stories of glass and steel bearing my family's name. Tomorrow, I start building something new. May 19th, 2024. Gerald Whitford signed his resignation letter at 4 p.m. I wasn't there. I learned about it through an email from Robert Hartley. Your father has tendered his resignation effective June 15th, 2024. The board has appointed me as interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board has voted to offer you a formal position strategic advisor to the board. This role would allow you to participate in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. Please let me know your thoughts. Regards, Robert Hartley. I read the email 3 times, habit, and then forwarded it to Jonathan Ellis for review. His response came within an hour. Fair offer. Congratulations, Dulcie. That evening and all staff. Email went out to the Whitford Properties team. Effective June 15th. The board welcomes Dulcie Whitford as a strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. We thank Gerald for his years. My phone buzzed with messages, but one message stood out from Patricia Morales, an executive assistant who'd started at the company in 1987, who'd worked directly with my grandmother. Dewey Eleanor used to talk about you constantly. She said you saw things others missed. I never understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be so proud. I saved that message. Some validation doesn't come from family. New York Business Journal, Whitford Properties, shakeup. Founders' granddaughter takes control after secret will surfaces. The article didn't name me directly. In a dramatic turn of events, the heir apparent to the Whitford Properties empire has been displaced by a previously unknown family member. Sources close to the board describe the transition as long overdue and cite concerns about the former CEO's management style. Gerald and Priscilla cancel their appearance at the Metropolitan Museum Gala. Health reasons, according to their publicist. 3 investment partners requested meetings with me personally, not with my father, not with the board, but with me. 2 of them, after an hour-long conversation each, confirmed they continue their relationship with Whitford Properties. We've had concerns about Gerald's leadership for years. One admitted, your grandmother built something special. It's good to see her vision protected. The social fallout rippled outward. The Whitford name, which had once opened every door on the Upper East Side, now carried an asterisk. I didn't celebrate their humiliation, but I didn't mourn it either. Margaret Coleman called me on Saturday morning. A pause. Eleanor would have handled it exactly the same way. You know, the vote of confidence instead of termination, giving him a chance he didn't deserve. She laughed softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Mercy wasn't weakness, mercy was choice. And for the first time, the choice had been mine. June 8th, 2024. 3 weeks after the board meeting. My phone rang at 2 p.m. dulce. My mother's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can we talk? Just us. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral territory. No chance of Gerald appearing with lawyers. Priscilla was already there when I arrived. She looked older somehow. The careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath. Thank you for coming. She wrapped her hands around a cup she hadn't touched. I know I don't deserve it. What do you want, Mom? To apologize. The word came out cracked for everything. For the way we treated you, for the things we said. For the things we didn't say. Are you apologizing because you're sorry or because everything changed? She flinched. The question hung between us like smoke. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. Her eyes welled. I was so focused on Miranda's success, on maintaining appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet, but that was a lie. I told myself so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family, in front of business partners. You never defended. Me, not once, I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, and I can never undo it, but Dooley, I don't want to lose you entirely. I don't know if that's even possible anymore, but I had to try. I looked at this woman who'd been my mother for 28 years, who'd braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday as an adult. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try building something new, something. Honest, she nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Miranda called while I was walking through Central Park. I almost didn't answer. Dooley, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Miranda looked different. The armor of perfection she'd worn her whole life had cracked. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly. I've been in therapy, she said without preamble. Since? She laughed humorlessly. Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a gift. It's a different kind of cage. I waited. Dad expected me to be perfect. She stared at the fountain and the way they treated you. I told myself it was just how things were, that you were different, that I was protecting you by not challenging them. You weren't protecting me. No, I was protecting myself because if I defended you, I became a target too. She finally looked at me. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. What do you want from me, Miranda? Nothing. I don't deserve anything. Her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know. I see you now, really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. We sat in silence. Two sisters who'd grown up in the same house as strangers. I can't go back to how things were, I said finally. But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. I'd like that it wasn't the sister relationship I'd wanted as a child, but maybe it could become something real. November 2024, 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. One bedroom, pre-war building, a view of the bridge my grandmother had walked across to her first office in 1965. The rent was more than I'd ever paid, but I could afford it now. My new salary is Director of Sustainable Development at Whitford. The title was my idea, a new division focused on green building practices, sustainable real estate, environmental impact assessments, the kind of innovation my grandmother would have, championed if she'd lived to see it. Gerald called once a month now, short conversations, polite. He asked about the weather, about my new apartment, about work. We both pretended the past hadn't happened. It was easier that way. Priscilla and I had lunch every other week. Slowly. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of, but it was honest, which was more than we'd ever had. Miranda and I got coffee on weekends sometimes. We were learning each other, really learning for the first time. She told me about the pressure she carried. I told her about the loneliness. Neither of us pretended the past was okay, but we were writing a new story. On the wall of my apartment, I'd hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that I'd watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit, it's just right. I could almost see her smiling. You did it, Grandma. I thought you gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I was finally fully myself. Looking back, I understand something now that I couldn't have understood at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia isn't my flaw. It's part of who I am, like my visual memory, my patience, my ability to see patterns others miss. The things that Gerald judged worth by credentials, by degrees, by performance. Eleanor judged worth by character, by kindness, by the way people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now finally I get to judge my own worth. Not by what my parents say, not by what my sister achieved, not by what any stranger on the internet thinks, by my own standard, my own measure, my own truth. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, you don't need a secret inheritance to. prove your value. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They let you decide who gets access to your life and on what terms. My family hurt me for 28 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me, and nobody can ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by the people who failed to see it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment telling me your story. And if you want more stories, like this stories about ordinary people who found the courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.